I signed the papers at 6:58 a.m., not because he asked me to, because I had been planning to for 14 months, and his envelope simply removed the last variable I had been waiting on. Patricia had the counterfiling ready before I had even capped the pen. My attorney had drafted it in February. It named me as the sole petitioner and listed, in 3 pages of careful language, the terms Daniel would spend the next 2 years trying to reverse. That was fast. I've had time to think. You're not even going to ask why? I know why, Daniel. I've known since March. Patricia arrived at 8:22 with a garment bag, a flat white from the cart downstairs, and the kind of expression that meant the board had already been notified. I changed in the hospital bathroom, which has bad lighting and smells of industrial soap, and I thought about the last time I had felt small. It was a Thursday. I was 26. I was sitting in a glass conference room on the 14th floor of Holt Capitol, being told, politely, by 3 men in matching suits, that I did not have the temperament for senior leadership. The man who had said it most clearly was my grandfather, 2 months before he put the controlling interest in my name and retired to Connecticut. Patricia, handing over the coffee. The Langley vote is at 11. Crawford is already circling. Crawford always circles. He's never landed. Patricia. He has Donahue. Claire, a beat. He has Donahue today. I buttoned the jacket. The suit was the one I keep at the office for emergencies. Charcoal, single-breasted, the kind that says nothing and means everything. Patricia had thought to bring the pearl earrings. I put them on and looked in the mirror above the hospital sink and thought, this is the face Daniel has never once seen clearly. He had seen the wife, the woman who learned to keep quiet at dinner parties, the woman who organized her feelings into small, manageable compartments and never left them somewhere he might trip over them. He had never sat in the room where I sign off on quarterly earnings for a company that clears $400 million in annual revenue. He had never heard Margaret Holt say my name the way she says it, with the particular weight of someone passing something forward, not down. Babies with the nurses. Vitals are perfect. Her name is Nora. It's a good name. It was my mother's middle name. I stopped at the nursery window on my way out. The corridor was quiet. A nurse I didn't know was adjusting the mobile above the second bassinet from the left. Nora was asleep, face turned slightly to one side, one small fist beside her ear. She had been in the world for less than 3 hours. She had no idea what had happened in the room where she was born. She had no idea what was about to happen in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a building 11 blocks east. I pressed my hand flat against the glass for exactly 4 seconds. Then I walked toward the elevator. I'll be back by 2. Daniel was in the elevator. He was still holding the envelope, my copy of the papers. He had not expected to see me in a suit. I watched him process it the way people process things that contradict information they thought was settled. The elevator doors closed. The building's fluorescent hum filled the space between us. I had 11 blocks and 47 minutes to become someone he had never met. Daniel. Where are you going? Claire. Work. Daniel. Claire, you just had a baby 6 hours ago. Claire. 5 hours and 41 minutes. Daniel. This is insane. Claire. You should call your attorney, Daniel. Tell him the timeline has changed. Patricia had the briefing file open on her tablet before the car had cleared the hospital parking structure. I took it without looking up. The Langley acquisition had been 18 months in the making. A logistics firm out of Portland with clean books, a regional footprint, and a board that didn't know yet that I had been quietly purchasing their debt since the previous October. Crawford's move was to force a confidence vote before the Langley deal closed. If he got Donahue, he had 6 votes. 6 votes meant a tied board. A tied board meant delay. Delay meant Langley's window closed and Crawford could position his own buyer. It was not a complicated play. It was the kind of play a man makes when he believes the person across the table is temporarily distracted. Patricia. Donahue confirmed his position at 8:45. Claire. Who told him I was unavailable? Patricia. Crawford's office sent a message to the full board at 7 this morning. It said you were on medical leave. Claire. Medical leave. Patricia. Indefinite. Claire. Pull up the Langley debt schedule. The October tranche first. The security desk logged me in at 9:28. Marcus, who has worked the morning shift for 11 years and who greets everyone on the executive floor by first name and nothing else, looked up when I came through the glass doors and did not say anything for 2 full seconds. I have seen Marcus Hale unsurprised by almost everything. He had been at the desk the morning my grandfather collapsed in the elevator. He had been there the night the SEC filing leaked. He logged me in. He handed me my badge. He said what he always says. Good morning, Ms. Mercer. Good morning, Marcus. Mr. Crawford came in at 8:15. He had guests. How many? 4. Plus Donahue. Thank you. I rode up alone. The elevator in this building is original to the 1987 renovation. Mirrored walls, brushed brass trim, a faint smell of the sandalwood diffuser Patricia orders from a supplier in Portland. My grandfather rode this elevator every working day for 22 years. He told me once that the most important thing a leader could do was arrive, not speak, not perform. Simply arrive in the right room at the right moment and let the room recalibrate around them. I was 32 floors above street level, 5 hours and 59 minutes postpartum in a charcoal suit that still had a faint crease from the garment bag. I thought about Nora's fist pressed against her cheek. I thought about the envelope on the hospital tray. I pressed 32. The doors opened. The assistant at the reception desk, Jonah, 24, 3 months in, stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the credenza. Ms. Mercer, Mr. Crawford said, "Is the conference room set?" "Yes, but Mr. Crawford is already, he's called the meeting for 9:45. "Then I'm early." I could hear Crawford's voice through the boardroom door. He has a particular register he uses when he believes he is among allies, louder than necessary, with a rhythm that assumes agreement. I had sat across from Richard Crawford for 9 years. I had watched him mistake patience for weakness in 4 separate people, and I had watched all 4 of them eventually correct that misapprehension in ways he had not recovered from. He was 61 years old and had never once, in my presence, said the words, "I was wrong," without immediately following them with a clause that reassigned the error. Patricia handed me the October file. I tucked it under my arm. I thought about what my grandfather used to say before a difficult meeting. He said, "Go in like you own it." He meant that literally. I own 53% of this building. Patricia, quietly. Ready? Open the door. Crawford was standing at the head of the table. He had a presentation pulled up on the screen, a slide titled Leadership Continuity During Transition. 5 board members were seated. Donahue was third from the left, not looking at anyone. Crawford's outside counsel sat against the wall with a legal pad. When I walked in, the room did exactly what rooms do when something has been miscalculated. It went very quiet, very fast. I have been in this room for difficult conversations before. The first time I walked in as chair, Margaret Holt had stood up and started clapping. Not for drama, but because she had been waiting 11 years to hand this room to someone she trusted. That was 22 months ago. I still think about it when the room feels like it's working against me. Crawford, recovering quickly. Claire, we weren't expecting. I heard you were... Claire, setting the file on the table. Sit down, Richard. Crawford, stiffening. I called this meeting under Article 7. It's properly... Claire, sit down. He sat. I have never raised my voice in this room. I have never needed to. Crawford sat, and his outside counsel clicked his pen closed, and Donahue finally looked up from the table. I opened the October file and slid 3 copies down the table without looking at where they landed. The Langley Debt Schedule. Page 1, line 4. Holt Capital. Beneficial owner, 41% of outstanding senior notes. Page 2. The Conversion Clause. Page 3. The letter from Langley's lead director, dated 8 days ago, confirming they had accepted our terms. Crawford had built his entire play on a company I had already quietly agreed to buy. Crawford. This was not disclosed to the full board. Claire. It was disclosed to the Finance Committee on October the 9th. You chair the Finance Committee, Richard. Crawford. The October 9th meeting was a preliminary... Claire. The minutes reflect a full briefing. Patricia has the recording if the minutes are in dispute. Donahue cleared his throat. He is 64, a former appellate judge, and he has a particular quality I have always respected. He knows when a room has already decided, and he does not pretend otherwise. He looked at Crawford for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the document in front of him. I had not slept in 22 hours. My back hurt in a way I was not going to think about until I was alone. There was a detail I kept returning to, the way Nora had made a small sound, somewhere between a breath and a word, when the nurse had placed her on my chest for the first time. I had counted to 7 before they took her to do the assessments. I had needed something to count. Donahue. I'd like to table the confidence motion. Crawford. James. Donahue. I'd like to table it, Richard, pending a full Finance Committee review. The vote to table was 6-1. Crawford did not look at me when it was called. His outside counsel gathered his legal pad and left before the result was formally recorded. The room exhaled in the particular way rooms exhale when the thing everyone was dreading has turned out to be smaller than it appeared. Margaret Holt, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with her hands folded and had not said a single word since I walked in, caught my eye and held it for a moment. She did not nod. She did not smile. She simply looked at me with the expression of someone watching a thing go exactly as they expected. How is she? 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She has my mother's hands. Margaret. Good. I sat in my office for 4 minutes before Patricia knocked. The office faces east. At this hour, the light comes in at a low angle across the desk, which is the same desk my grandfather used from 1991 until his retirement, refinished once in 2014, but otherwise unchanged. There are 3 photographs on the credenza behind me. My grandfather at the groundbreaking of the Portland facility, my mother at her MBA graduation, 1987, and one I added 6 weeks ago, the first ultrasound, the one where the technician had said, "There she is," in a voice that was professionally neutral, but not quite. I had not told Daniel I'd put it there. I had not told Daniel many things. Patricia, your attorney called. Daniel's counsel has already responded to the counterfiling. How fast? 40 minutes. He had it drafted already? Patricia set the response letter on the desk. I read it in 2 minutes. Daniel's attorney was asking for a stay on the counterfiling pending disclosure of all marital assets. The phrasing on page 2 stopped me. Respondents' undisclosed financial interests, including any controlling stake in privately held entities. He knew. Or his attorney had guessed. Either way, someone had told him enough to ask the question. I thought about when. I thought about the Thursday in January when he had come home late and smelled of a restaurant I recognized and said he had been with a client. I had not followed that thread at the time. I was going to follow it now. Patricia, do you want me to get Harmon on the phone? Claire, yes, and Patricia, find out who Daniel's attorney has been talking to inside this building. Patricia, a pause. You think it's internal? Claire, the disclosure language is too specific for a guess. Harmon called back at 11:34. He is 67, has been my family's attorney since before I was born, and he speaks the way men speak when they have spent 4 decades ensuring that their words are never used against them. Carefully, with long pauses that are not uncertainty, but precision. He had read Daniel's response letter before I had finished my coffee. His first question was not about the legal strategy. It was about the source. I had been thinking about the source since Patricia left the room. There are 11 people inside Holt Capital who know the full scope of my ownership stake. 3 of them are on the board. 2 are in legal. The other 6 are in finance, and one of those 6 had been hired 14 months ago on a recommendation from Daniel's college roommate. I had filed that away at the time as a coincidence. I do not believe in coincidences the way I used to. The language in paragraph 4 didn't come from a guess, Claire. I know. It came from someone who has seen the Meridian Trust documents. How many people outside this firm have seen those documents? As of this morning, 1. His name was Owen Pratt, 29, Stanford MBA. He had been in the structured finance division for 14 months, and in that time he had been quietly careful in a way that reads, to most people, as competence. To me, it had always read as something slightly different. The stillness of a person who is managing what they allow to be seen. Patricia pulled his access logs in 40 minutes. The Meridian Trust file had been opened from his workstation on a Tuesday evening 6 weeks ago at 7:43 p.m. when the floor was empty. He had not downloaded it. He had not printed it. He had read it on screen for 11 minutes and closed it without a trace, except that our system logs every document access by duration and employee ID, and Patricia knows where to look. I thought about what it costs a person to do something like that. Not the risk, the decision. The moment when someone chooses a side and acts on it quietly over weeks and waits. I thought about Daniel coming home that Thursday in January. The restaurant I had recognized was 4 blocks from Pratt's apartment. I know this because I looked it up that same night and told myself I was being paranoid. Patricia, setting the access log on my desk. Do you want HR involved? Not yet. I want to know what he sent and to whom. Patricia, it can pull his outbound from the last 6 weeks. Claire, give them until 3 o'clock. Daniel called at 12:41. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 12:43. I let that go too. His third call came while I was reviewing the Langley closing documents, and I picked up because Patricia gave me a look that meant the hospital had also tried to reach me, and I should probably confirm I was aware of that. He had been back at the hospital. He had spoken to the pediatric nurse. He had been told that a woman matching my description in a dark suit had stopped at the nursery window at 8:51 a.m. and then left the building. He had been there when they told him this. I thought about the 4 seconds I had pressed my hand to the glass. I had not known he would find out about those 4 seconds. I was not sure how I felt about him knowing. You left. You actually left the hospital. I'll be back before 2. Daniel. Claire, she's 6 hours old. Claire. 5 hours and... I had a board meeting, Daniel. Daniel. A board meeting. Claire. Yes. Daniel. What board? There it was. Not what meeting. Not what company. What board? He had been briefed enough to ask the right question. He just didn't know yet that asking it was the moment everything shifted between us permanently. I had imagined this conversation in several forms over the past 14 months. In some versions, I told him calmly, in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. In one version, I told him at dinner on our anniversary, which I now understand was a form of hope I had not yet given up on. In none of the versions did it happen on the phone while I was sitting at my grandfather's desk, 11 blocks from the hospital where our daughter was sleeping in a bassinet with my mother's name taped above it. Claire, I'll explain everything when I come back. Have someone from the nursing staff call me if Nora needs anything before 2. Daniel. Claire. I'll be there at 2, Daniel. I did not make it back by 2. The IT report came in at 2:15, and it was worse than I had expected, which is the thing about evidence. It rarely confirms exactly what you suspected. It usually confirms something adjacent that is somehow harder to absorb. Pratt had sent 3 emails from a personal account accessed on his phone. Not to Daniel, to Daniel's attorney. The first was in December, a summary of the Meridian Trust structure in plain language. The second was in February, a valuation estimate, conservative, that put my controlling interest in Holt Capital at somewhere between $340 and $380 million. The third was sent 11 days ago. It contained a single line. She's due in the next 2 weeks. The timing you discussed should work. I read that last line 3 times. I set the paper down on the conference table. The window in this room faces the street below, and I watched a delivery truck try to reverse into a loading dock for a long moment without seeing it. The timing you discussed. Patricia. Claire. I need 5 minutes. Patricia. Of course. Stay. She stayed. Patricia has worked with me for 6 years. She was with me the morning my grandfather died. She was with me the day the board voted and Margaret Holt stood up and began to clap. She has a gift for silence that I have never adequately thanked her for. The kind of silence that does not ask anything of the person sitting in it. I thought about the delivery room, the envelope placed on the tray, neat and deliberate, the way Daniel had not looked at me when he set it down. I had read it at the time as guilt. I understood now that it was not guilt. It was the particular flatness of a person executing a plan they have been sitting with long enough that the feeling has gone out of it. He had filed those papers because he believed that the moment Nora was born, the moment I was physically at my most limited, my most exposed, was the correct moment to act. He had been advised of that. He had agreed to that. He had stood in a delivery room at 6 in the morning and handed me an envelope and said, I wanted to do this before things got complicated. How long has Harmon known about Pratt? Patricia. He called while you were reading. He says since this morning. He didn't want to tell you until he had the full picture. Tell him I have the full picture. I was an hour and 18 minutes late. The nurse at the ward desk, her badge said Carmen, and she had a voice that belonged to someone who has spent years being steady in rooms where people are not, told me Nora had fed twice and was sleeping. I changed out of the suit in the small family bathroom at the end of the corridor. I folded it over my arm and put on the soft clothes Patricia had thought to include at the bottom of the garment bag. I had not asked her to include them. She had known to anyway. Daniel was not there. He had left a note on the bassinet, 4 words in his handwriting on a piece of hospital notepad paper. I'll call my attorney. I held it for a moment, then set it on the tray exactly where he had set the envelope that morning. It seemed like the right place for it. I sat in the chair beside Nora's bassinet. The ward was quiet except for the soft machinery of the monitoring equipment, and, somewhere down the hall, a television playing at low volume. The afternoon light came through the high window at an angle that turned everything in the room the same pale gold. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you, Carmen." She's been very calm. Some of them fuss a lot the first day. She just looks around. She's taking inventory. She woke at 4:37. I'd been watching her face for 59 minutes. The small movements of sleep, the way her expression shifted through states that had no names yet, the occasional twitch of her fingers. When she opened her eyes, they were the unfocused, dark blue of all newborns, and she moved her head very slightly in my direction with the blind certainty of someone who has already decided where the important things are. I had spent 14 months managing the information about my life with the precision of someone protecting a legal document. I had kept the Meridian Trust from Daniel because I had learned, by small increments, that he was the kind of person who changed in the presence of significant money. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that water changes stone. Patient, consistent, invisible until the shape is already different. I had kept it from him because I had been trying to find out whether he could love the version of me that existed without it. He had answered that question this morning. At 6:14 a.m., with an envelope on a hospital tray. "It's just us now. I need you to know that's not the sad version of this." Margaret Holt arrived at 6 o'clock with no prior notice, which is the only way Margaret Holt does anything. She was carrying a small paper bag from the Italian place on Clement Street, the one she has been going to since 1987, when it was called something else and had red checked tablecloths. She handed it to me in the corridor without preamble. She looked through the window at Nora for a long moment. Margaret had one daughter. Her name was Sylvie, and she had died at 31 in a car accident on the Marin Headlands on a clear October morning in 2009. Margaret does not talk about Sylvie. She talks around her, the way you talk around something that is so much part of the shape of a room that pointing at it would be redundant. I have never asked her directly. I have simply learned to understand the pauses. Margaret. Crawford tendered his resignation at 5:45. Claire. I know. Patricia called. Margaret. He'll claim health reasons. Claire. Let him. Margaret. She has your mother's jaw. I keep seeing different things. That's what they do. They show you everyone you've ever loved, all at once. Daniel came back at 8:14. I heard him in the corridor before I saw him. His footsteps have a particular quality on hard floors, heavier on the left than the right from an old ankle injury he has never had looked at properly. I was sitting in the chair by the window with Nora asleep against my chest, and I did not move when the door opened. I had been expecting him for approximately 4 hours. I had used those 4 hours to think through every version of what he might say, and I had arrived at a position that felt less like anger and more like the particular stillness of someone who has already done the math. He stopped 2 feet inside the door. He was wearing different clothes than this morning. He had gone home, which meant he had made a decision about what kind of conversation this was going to be. He had a look I recognized, the one he gets when he has been rehearsing and has just realized the room is not configured the way he rehearsed it. Daniel, looking at Nora, then at me. You should be in the bed. Claim fine in the chair. Daniel. Claire. Sit down, Daniel. Or don't. But keep your voice low. He sat in the chair across from me, the one the nurses use when they come in to check the monitors. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees, which is the posture he uses when he wants to appear open to a conversation while actually controlling it. I have watched him use it in 4 arguments and 2 dinner parties where someone said something he disagreed with. I thought about the first time I saw him, a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital 7 years ago. He'd been standing near the bar, talking to someone I didn't know, And he had laughed at something, genuinely, without performing it. And I had thought, that is a man who does not yet know what he wants. I had found that interesting at the time. I understood now that I had misread interesting for safe. Daniel, my attorney says you're the controlling shareholder of Holt Capital. Your attorney is correct. Daniel, how long? 22 months as chair. The trust has held the interest since I was 19. 19. My grandfather structured it that way. He didn't believe in waiting. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to me, and I watched him the way you watch something you have been studying for a long time finally become what it always was. Outside the window, the street below had the particular quiet of a city evening. The last of the commuter traffic, a bus pulling away from the stop on the corner, the lights of the building across the street coming on floor by floor. I had looked at this view from this window for the past 14 hours. It had become the backdrop of the longest day of my life, and I was going to remember it with a precision I did not choose. Nora made a small sound against my chest. I shifted her slightly, and she settled. She is, so far, the most reasonable person I have ever met. Daniel, 300 and... My attorney's estimate was 300 and... Your attorney's estimate was conservative. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? Which time did you want me to tell you, Daniel? He looked at me. It was the first time all day he had looked at me without the envelope, without the posture, without the rehearsed version of whatever he had decided to be in this conversation. Just looked. I'd been waiting for him to ask the real questions since 6:14 this morning. Most people never get to the real question. They circle it for years and call the circling a relationship. I had circled it myself, with patience I now understand was a form of cowardice dressed up as strategy. The real question was not about the money. It was not about the company. It was about the Tuesday evening 4 years ago when we had sat in my car in the parking lot of a restaurant we had driven 40 minutes to reach, and I had almost told him everything. I had looked at his face in the dark, and I had decided, for a reason I could not have explained then and can explain perfectly now, not to. Did you ever trust me? I wanted to. That's not an answer. I know. He sat back down, not in the nurse's chair this time, on the edge of the bed, facing away from me, looking at the floor. Outside in the corridor, someone walked past with a cart that had one squeaky wheel, and we both heard it, and neither of us acknowledged it, and it passed, and the room was quiet again. I thought about Owen Pratt reading the Meridian Trust documents at 7:43 on a Tuesday evening in an empty office. I thought about Daniel's attorney composing a letter with the phrase, "the timing you discussed." I thought about the version of Daniel I had been trying to find for 4 years, the one who had laughed genuinely at a fundraiser and seemed, for a moment, to not know what he wanted. I had spent 4 years trying to determine if that man was real or if he had simply been what I needed to see that night. I told Brennan, my attorney, I told him about the company. In January. He found Pratt on his own. I didn't know he had. I didn't know about the emails. But you knew someone was looking. Yes. And you let them. I thought I needed to know what I was dealing with. So did I, Daniel. So did I. He turned around then, fully, for the first time since he had sat down. There was something in his face I had not seen before. Not guilt, exactly. Not the performing of remorse, but something underneath it. Something that looked like a man realizing that a version of events he had constructed with great care has just developed a crack that goes all the way through. I had signed those papers at 6:58 this morning. My counterfiling had named 3 specific violations of the prenuptial agreement. Violations that Harmon had been documenting since March, long before this morning, long before the envelope on the tray. The papers Daniel had handed me had not surprised me. What had surprised me, what I was still sitting with in this chair, with my daughter asleep against my chest, was the particular loneliness of having been right about a person. Being right about someone you hope to be wrong about is not a victory. It is just the end of hoping. Daniel, the delivery room. Claire, I need you to understand that I didn't. You planned it for the delivery room. The timing was Brennan's. You knew the timing was the delivery room, and you came anyway. That's the part I needed to hear you say. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that Nora woke again, briefly, and looked at the ceiling with her dark blue, unfocused eyes in the manner of someone reviewing a situation before deciding what to do about it. She decided to go back to sleep. I could learn from that. Daniel looked at her. The posture changed. All of it. The elbows on knees, the controlled distance, the rehearsed version of himself. He looked at his daughter for the first time all day without a document in his hand, and I watched something happen in his face that I did not have a name for. I am not sure he had a name for it either. It was the look of someone arriving somewhere too late to do anything useful about it. Can I hold her? Claire. Yes? I transferred her carefully. Daniel took her the way he had taken her this morning, but different. This morning had been duty. This was something that did not have a clean word. He sat back down on the edge of the bed and held her, and she made no objection, because Nora so far appears to reserve judgment with the patience of someone who has decided the data is still coming in. I watched him hold her for 4 minutes. I counted, not because I was measuring anything, but because my mind defaults to counting when it is trying not to feel too precisely. 4 minutes and some seconds, and then he passed her back to me, and he stood up, and he picked up his jacket from the back of the nurse's chair. I had expected a final statement, something Brennan had coached, something that would appear reasonable in a courtroom. He gave me none of that. I'll have Brennan reach out to Harmon this week. That's fine. She should know her father. Claire, I know that. Daniel, I didn't know you, did I? Claire, no. But neither did I for a long time. The door closed with the soft, mechanical click of hospital doors everywhere, engineered not to slam, not to startle, to close the way things close when people need them to be quiet. I sat in the chair for a while after that. The corridor outside went through its evening rhythms. Footsteps, a cart, a door, voices that stayed in their register and did not carry. Nora slept. The monitor beside the bassinet breathed its green numbers steadily. I thought about the fundraiser 7 years ago. I thought about the parking lot 4 years ago, and the thing I had decided not to say. I thought about my grandfather in this same elevator building, riding up every morning for 22 years with whatever he carried, and the thing he had once told me about arriving, that the most important thing was to arrive in the right room at the right moment and let the room recalibrate around you. I had arrived in 5 rooms today. The delivery room at 6:14, the lobby at 9:28, the boardroom at 9:34, the conference room at 2:51, and this one. The room recalibrated in all 5 of them. I was very tired. Inventory complete for today, I think. Nora had been in the world for 22 days. She slept in a bassinet in the corner of my office, between the credenza and the east-facing window, which gets the best morning light and the least foot traffic. Patricia had sourced a sound machine that plays something described on the packaging as gentle coastal ambiance, and which sounds to me like a very small and conscientious ocean. The pediatrician had cleared us both for the return on day 18. My mother's sister had come from Portland for the first 2 weeks and had left on a Sunday morning with the particular expression of a woman who has assessed a situation, determined it is being handled correctly, and removed herself accordingly. I had been in the office since 7:15. The Langley closing was scheduled for 11. Harmon's team was downstairs in the small conference room reviewing the final transfer documents. Outside my window, the city was doing what cities do at this hour, assembling itself, floor by floor and block by block, into the version of itself that would run until dark. On my desk, next to the Langley file, was a copy of Financial Quarterly. The issue had come out 4 days ago. My photograph was on the cover. Not a posed photograph. It was one Patricia had not told me was being taken during the Langley announcement press briefing 3 months ago, and it showed me at the podium mid-sentence with the particular expression of someone who has already decided what the next 3 sentences will be. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect: How Claire Mercer Rebuilt Holt Capital from the Inside Out." Patricia: Harmon's team wants to know if you're joining them at 9. Claire: Tell them I'll be down at 9:15. The Meridian Amendment needs to go first. Patricia: That's a good photograph. Claire: It was taken without my knowledge. Patricia: That's why it's good. Owen Pratt arrived at 9:50, 2 minutes early, in the manner of someone who has been trying very hard for 3 weeks to appear as though nothing is wrong. He was 29, and he dressed like someone who had been told what competence looks like and had assembled the components correctly without quite understanding the thing they were meant to convey. He had a good poker face. I had a better one, which he did not know, because the only time we had been in the same room before this morning was a quarterly review where I had sat at the far end of the table and said nothing directly to him. Patricia was in the room. Harmon's associate, a quiet woman named Ellison who had been in employment law for 11 years, sat against the wall with a folder. The HR director, whose name is Stephen, and who has the quality of someone who has seen enough that very little surprises him anymore, sat across from Pratt. I sat at the head of the table. Pratt looked at me when he sat down, and I watched him understand, in the space of approximately 2 seconds, that this was not the meeting he had been told it was. Kai was told this was a performance review. Claire: It was described that way, yes. Pratt: Ms. Mercer, I don't... Claire, opening a folder. December the 14th, 7:43 p.m. The Meridian Trust File. Your workstation ID. He went very still. It is a particular kind of stillness, not the stillness of someone who is innocent and confused, but the stillness of someone running rapid calculations about what has been established and what can still be disputed. I have sat across from that stillness before. It has a quality like a held breath. I thought about the email. The timing you discussed should work. 11 words sent 11 days before Nora was born, from a company workstation to Daniel's attorney, from a man I had hired in good faith on a professional recommendation that I now understood had not been offered in good faith. I had spent 22 days deciding what I felt about that. What I had arrived at was not rage. Rage would have been simpler. What I had arrived at was a cold, clear understanding that some people move through the world like instruments, and the only reasonable response is to remove the instrument from the situation with precision and without drama. Any access to that file would have been, I work in structured finance. There are legitimate reasons. 11 minutes at 7:43 on a Tuesday, when the floor was empty. I don't remember the timing you discussed should work. He looked at the email for a long time, long enough that the sound of the building's ventilation system became noticeable, long enough that Stephen shifted slightly in his chair. long enough that I had time to look at Pratt's hands on the table and note that they were perfectly still. The hands of someone who has decided that stillness is the same as composure, and who has not yet learned that composure is not a posture, but a condition. I thought about Daniel sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, holding Nora for 4 minutes, and then standing up and picking up his jacket. I thought about the door closing with its soft, engineered click. I had not heard from Daniel directly since that night. Harmon and Brennan had been exchanging documents 3 times a week. The prenuptial violations were not being contested. The asset disclosure process was proceeding in the particular tedious and expensive way that legal processes proceed when one party is trying to delay the inevitable and the other party has a very good attorney and unlimited patience. I'd like to call my attorney. Ellison will give you the number for our legal team. You'll also want your own representation. You're being terminated for cause, effective today. The civil matter is separate. Ellison will explain the timeline. The Langley closing ran 47 minutes. 18 months of work compressed into a conference room, 3 sets of signatures, and the particular silence that follows the execution of a large document when everyone in the room has been awake since early morning and would like very much to have lunch. I signed last, which is how I always sign, not from ceremony, but because I want to have read everything that came before my name. My grandfather had the same habit. Harmon used to say it drove the other side's attorneys to distraction. I consider that a feature. I was back at my desk by 11:52. Nora was awake, examining the ceiling with the focused intensity she brings to any new surface. I picked her up and stood at the east window and showed her the city the way you show a painting to someone who is learning to see, not explaining it, just presenting it, letting them work out their own relationship to the scale of things. Patricia knocked at 11:58 and handed me a message slip without saying anything. I read it. Then I read it again. Then I looked at Patricia. This came in when? 11:40. While you were in the closing. He called the main line? He called the main line, asked for you by name, and gave his full name to the receptionist without being asked. Did he leave a number? He said he'd be at the Clement Street location until 2. The restaurant on Clement Street is the one Margaret has been going to since 1987, when it was called something else. It seats 32. The lunch crowd thins by 1, and when I arrived at 1:14, the room was at half capacity, a configuration that suited the conversation I was about to have, and which I suspected had been chosen deliberately. Marcus Webb is 64 years old, silver-haired, and has the particular quality of a man who has made a very large amount of money in a very quiet way, and who no longer needs to perform anything for anyone. He had been my grandfather's silent partner in the Meridian Trust from the beginning, the other name on the founding documents, the one that appears on page 7 under co-trustee in lettering so understated that Daniel's attorney had apparently missed it entirely. He was sitting at the corner table with a glass of water and a copy of Financial Quarterly open to page 42. He closed it when I sat down. He looked at Nora in the carrier against my chest with the expression of a man who has been told about a thing and is now seeing it for the first time and finding that it is exactly as significant as advertised. Marcus Webb, unhurried. She has Elaine's jaw. Claire, everyone keeps finding different things. Marcus Webb. Elaine was your grandmother. I knew her before your grandfather did. She had that jaw. Marcus Webb had sent a gift to the hospital, a single arrangement of white peonies with a card that said only, "Well done," in handwriting that belongs to a man who learned penmanship before it stopped being taught. I had not known the flowers were from him until Patricia checked the florist. He had not expected acknowledgement. He had been watching the Pratt situation from a distance, he told me. He had been watching the divorce filing. He had been watching the Langley acquisition and the Crawford confidence vote and the cover of Financial Quarterly, and all of it with the attentiveness of someone who has a specific reason to pay attention and has not yet determined the right moment to say so. He had a proposal. He had been working on it for 6 months, before the delivery room, before the envelope, before any of this. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The first page had 3 lines on it, a company name I recognized, a valuation I had not expected, and a sentence that read, "Pending your availability and interest, the co-trustee position is being expanded. Marcus Webb. Your grandfather wanted to tell you himself. He ran out of time." Looking at the folder, "This is the Hargrove Fund." Was. "It's been restructured. New name on page 3. Claire, turning to page 3, a pause. "He named it. Marcus Webb. He named it in 2019, before he knew he was sick." The new name of the fund was Nora Elaine Capital. It had been registered in the state of Delaware in October 2019, 14 months before my grandfather died, 8 months before I knew I was pregnant, 3 years before the morning in the delivery room when a man I had married placed an envelope on a hospital tray and said he wanted to do things before they got complicated. My grandfather had named a fund for a child who did not exist yet. He had done this because he knew me well enough to know that she would exist, that I would, eventually, make a decision about the version of my life I wanted to build, and that there would be someone I would build it for. He had simply prepared the structure in advance, the way he prepared everything, quietly, with patience, without requiring that the person it was meant for understand it before they were ready. I sat with that for a moment. Nora shifted in the carrier. Outside the window, Clement Street moved through its afternoon. The produce market 2 doors down, a woman walking a very small dog with great ceremony. A bus pulling away from the stop at the corner. Normal. Persistent. Indifferent to what was happening in a restaurant at a corner table. What does the co-trustee expansion require from me? 3 board seats, final approval on acquisitions over 50 million, and, when she's ready, you teach her. Claire. She's 22 days old. Marcus Webb. Your grandfather started teaching you when you were 4. He used to bring you to the Saturday morning calls. Claire. I remember those calls. Marcus Webb. I know. I was on them. We were there until 2:40. The lunch crowd had fully cleared by the time Marcus Webb signed the co-trustee amendment across from me, using the same fountain pen he had apparently used to sign the original Meridian documents in 1991, which is the kind of continuity that means something even when you cannot fully articulate what. The restaurant owner, a man in his 70s named Paolo, who had been there since the place had its original name, brought us espresso without being asked, because Marcus Webb has been coming here long enough that his preferences are simply known. I thought about Daniel calling his attorney. I thought about Pratt's still hands on the conference room table. I thought about Crawford's resignation letter, which Harmon had described as aggressively unremarkable. I thought about the envelope on the hospital tray and the 4 seconds I had pressed my hand to the nursery glass and the 11 blocks between the hospital and this building and all the things that had happened in the hours between those 2 moments. Nora had fallen asleep during the signing. She was good at sleeping through things that mattered. I intended to teach her, eventually, the difference between sleeping through something and choosing not to be disturbed by it. That was a later lesson. She had time. Paolo, clearing the cups to Marcus Webb. Same time next month? Marcus Webb, looking at me. Perhaps. We may be busier. Claire, closing the folder. We will definitely be busier. Nora was 6 months and 4 days old. She had learned to sit up 11 days ago, and she approached this new capability with the focused, experimental quality of someone who has recently acquired a tool and is methodically determining its range of applications. She sat in the portable chair Patricia had ordered. Low, wide-based, engineered for exactly this developmental stage. And she held a soft cloth block in both hands and looked at it with an expression that I recognized as concentration, because it is the same expression I make when I am reading a contract that has something interesting on page 4. The office had changed in 6 months in the way offices change when they begin to accommodate a life rather than just work. A photograph on the credenza that had not been there before. A small basket of things near the window. A sound machine that still played its conscientious ocean. The financial quarterly cover was framed now, not because I had framed it, but because Patricia had, quietly, and placed it in the small sitting area by the door where clients wait, and I had not moved it because the argument against it required more energy than I had on the day I noticed it. Today was the formal launch of Nora Elaine Capital. The announcement had gone out 3 days ago. My inbox had received, in the 72 hours since, 411 messages, which Patricia had sorted into 7 categories, of which I had personally read 2. Patricia. The venue confirmed final headcount, 214. Claire. Crawford? Patricia. He was not invited. Claire. I know. I'm asking if he tried. Patricia. His assistant called to inquire about availability. Claire. And? Patricia. I told her the event was at capacity. Claire. Good. The room held 214 people, and the particular energy of a gathering where everyone present understands that they are witnessing something that will be referred to later as a beginning. Marcus Webb was near the bar with 3 people I recognized from the Hargrove Fund's original investor circle, speaking in the unhurried way of a man who has been in enough rooms to know which ones matter and which ones only think they do. Margaret Holt stood near the window with a glass of water. She does not drink at events, a discipline she has maintained since 1994 for reasons she has never explained. Wearing a suit the color of winter sky, and looking at the room with the expression of someone reviewing work they had a hand in. I had worn the charcoal suit, not the emergency suit from the hospital. That one I had sent to be cleaned and had placed, folded, in the closet at home in the particular way you place things you are not ready to examine. This was a different charcoal suit, cut slightly differently, with the kind of detail that is invisible unless you know what you are looking at. My grandfather had a theory about clothes at important events. He said you should wear something that feels like yourself on the best version of a normal day. Not armor, not performance. Just the version of you that already knows how this goes. Nora was with my aunt at the house on Sacramento Street. She had been fed at 5:15, which gave me a window. I had the sound of her breathing in my memory from this morning, the particular rhythm of a person who has no concept yet of a day that has stakes in it. And I carried that with me the way you carry a thing that keeps you calibrated. Your grandfather would have stood exactly where you're standing. Near the exit, he liked to see the whole room. I spoke for 9 minutes. I had written the remarks myself on a Tuesday evening at the kitchen table after Nora was asleep, with a cup of tea that went cold on my left and a legal pad that I had filled and then largely discarded in favor of 3 index cards that said, essentially, where it came from, what it is for, and what comes next. Patricia had asked if I wanted her to review the remarks. I told her no. She had given me the look that means she will be listening very carefully and will have notes afterward, and I had accepted that. I talked about my grandfather. Not the public version, not the founder's biography that runs in the annual report, But the Saturday morning calls when I was 4, sitting on the floor of his study with a glass of orange juice, listening to men discuss numbers I did not understand in a language I was already starting to learn. I talked about what it means to build something that is meant to outlast you. I talked about the name. I did not talk about the delivery room. I did not talk about the envelope. I did not talk about the 47 minutes between 6:14 a.m. and 7:43, or the 11 blocks, or the 4 seconds at the nursery glass. Some things are the architecture of a story without being the story itself. The people in this room did not need to know the architecture. They needed to know what had been built. Claire, my grandfather named this fund before she existed. He did that because he understood something I am still learning, that the right structures, built carefully enough, make room for people who haven't arrived yet. Margaret found me 16 minutes after I stepped off the podium, in the particular way Margaret finds people at events. Not seeking, just arriving, as though the room has arranged itself around the path between you. She handed me a glass of water without comment. She had been at every important moment in the past 6 months. She had not made a production of any of them. I thought about what she had said at the hospital window. They show you everyone you've ever loved, all at once. 6 months of Nora had confirmed this in ways I had not anticipated. She showed me my mother in the morning, in the particular angle of light on her face. She showed me my grandfather in the way she examines objects, with patience, with the sense that she has all the time she needs. She showed me, occasionally and without warning, people I had not expected, including a version of myself I did not remember being, a person who has not yet learned to be careful. I was working on unlearning some of that carefulness. It was slow work. Nora seemed to find my progress adequate. Margaret, the Hargrove investors are already talking to Webb about the second fund. I know. He told me at lunch on Tuesday. Margaret, he moves fast when he's interested. Claire, he's been interested since 1991. I don't think fast is the right word. Margaret, your grandfather told me before he died that the only decision he regretted was not telling you sooner. Claire, telling me what? Margaret, everything, all of it. He said he waited because he wanted you to find your own way to it. He said by the time he understood that you already had, there wasn't enough time left. Daniel was in the corridor. I had not known he would be there, and he had not known, until he saw my face, that I had not known. He was holding a copy of the announcement, the formal one, on Nora Elaine capital letterhead that had gone out 3 days ago. He had been sent one because Harmon had advised it, as a matter of proper disclosure given the ongoing legal proceedings. He had apparently come to understand something from reading it that he had not understood from the preceding 6 months of documents, filings, and correspondence. He looked different from the hospital. Not the difference of time, though that was there. The 6 months were visible in the particular way that difficult months are visible, as a quality of attention, a sense of someone who has been revising their understanding of a thing they thought they knew. He looked like a man who had been doing arithmetic for 6 months and had finally arrived at a number he had not wanted to reach. I thought about the Tuesday evening 4 years ago in the car park. The thing I had decided not to say. I understood it now with a completeness I had not had then. I had not said it because I had been protecting the possibility of him, which is a different thing from protecting him. Protecting a possibility is protecting a version of the future in which a person becomes who you need them to be. It is an act of hope dressed as restraint. I had spent 4 years learning that distinction. Nora Elaine Capital. Claire. Yes. Daniel. He named it before she was born. Claire. In 2019. Daniel. I didn't know any of this. Claire, I need you to understand that. The scope of it. I genuinely didn't. Claire, I know you didn't. He had something he wanted to say. I could see it in the way he held the announcement. Not loosely the way you hold a document you have finished reading, but with the grip of someone who has been using it as a reason to stand somewhere and wait. I let him find it. I have learned, in 6 months of managing things I cannot control, that some silences are worth waiting through. I thought about Nora at the house on Sacramento Street, asleep in the way she sleeps when she has been well fed and the ocean sound machine is running and my aunt is in the next room reading. I thought about the bassinet in my office and the east-facing window and the morning light that comes through at the angle my grandfather had always said it should. I thought about 3 index cards on a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening and a cup of tea gone cold, and the particular feeling of writing something true without armor around it. Daniel, I handled everything wrong. Claire, yes. Daniel, the delivery room, the attorney, all of it. Yes. Is there a version where... No, Daniel. How is she? Claire, she's wonderful. She sits up now. She holds things and examines them like she's running an assessment. Daniel, she gets that from you. Claire, she gets it from her great-grandfather. But yes. He nodded. He folded the announcement once, carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket, not discarding it, keeping it, which I noticed and did not comment on. He straightened his jacket in the way people straighten things when they are about to leave a conversation and want a moment of physical order before they go. I thought about the fundraiser 7 years ago. I thought about a man who laughed genuinely and seemed not to know what he wanted. I had spent a long time being sad about the distance between that man and the one who had walked into a delivery room with an envelope. I had spent less time lately being sad about it. Grief has a metabolism. You feed it less and it requires less. You do not starve it, that causes other problems, but you learn to portion it correctly, and eventually it becomes a thing you carry rather than a thing that carries you. Daniel, for what it's worth, I think he was right. Your grandfather. About you. I know he was. Daniel, that's very you. Claire, I know that too. My aunt had left by the time I got home. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter next to a covered plate. She went down at 9, ate well, very pleased with herself about the sitting, and a postscript that said she would be back Thursday. I stood in the kitchen in my good suit and ate the food she had left without sitting down, looking at the garden through the back window. The garden had the quality it gets in October, the last of the summer things and the first of what comes after, a transitional generosity that doesn't last. I went upstairs quietly. Nora's room is at the end of the hall, the one that gets the morning light from the east-facing window, and which I had repainted in April the color of the inside of a shell. Not pink, not white, something between the two that shifts depending on the hour. She was asleep on her back, both arms slightly out, in the posture of someone who has made a thorough assessment of the available space and claimed it. The sound machine played its small, careful ocean. I stood in the doorway for a while. I did not count the seconds this time. There is a version of the past year that is a story about a delivery room and an envelope and a man who mistimed everything. That version is accurate. It happened. The envelope was real. The tray was real. The fluorescent hospital light and the 11 blocks and the boardroom and the 4 seconds at the nursery glass. All of it real. All of it documented somewhere in the careful architecture of what that day produced. But there is another version that runs underneath it, older and less dramatic, that is about a man in Connecticut who sat on the floor of his study with a 4-year-old and talked to her about numbers on a Saturday morning, and understood something about her that she would spend 30 years catching up to. Who named a fund in 2019 for a person who did not exist yet because he knew she would? Who ran out of time before he could explain it and trusted that she would find her way to it anyway? He had been right. He was usually right. It ran in the family. Nora made the small sound she makes in deep sleep. Not distress, not language, just the sound of a person fully occupying their own rest. I had been cataloging her sounds for 6 months. This one was my favorite. Inventory complete. I sat on the front step for a while before I went to bed. The street was quiet, the particular quiet of a residential block after 10, when the last dog walkers have gone in and the lights in the houses have moved from the ground floors to the upper ones. The air had the October quality I had been noticing all week, clean, with something in it that was not quite cold, but was preparing to be. In 3 weeks, the Nora Elaine Capital First Fund would close. In 5 weeks, the Langley Integration Review would complete. In 8 weeks, I was scheduled to give the keynote at a conference in Seattle that Patricia had accepted on my behalf in February, which I had been mildly annoyed about at the time and had since decided was fine. The diary was full in the way a diary gets full when the structures are working, and the work is the right work, and the life arranged around it is the one you built rather than the one you inherited. I thought about my grandfather's elevator theory one more time. Arrive in the right room at the right moment. Let the room recalibrate. I had arrived in 5 rooms on the longest day of my life, and every one of them had recalibrated. I had arrived here, this step, this street, this house with the east-facing window and the small ocean sound, and this room had recalibrated too. It had taken 6 months. Some rooms take longer. The light in the upstairs window was on. Inside, 22 weeks and 4 days old, Nora Elaine Mercer was asleep with her arms out, claiming her space, running her assessments, preparing for whatever came next. She had no idea how much had been built for her before she arrived. I was going to enjoy telling her when she was ready. I thought she would find it interesting. She gets that from her great-grandfather, but also a little from me.